Today I'll go over the latest SCG Top 8 standard, in this case the SCG Invitational. Before I get started, a few words about the structure of the event. As you can guess, this SCG event is not open, but instead you need to qualify by gathering points throughout our other events. You can read more about how you get points to get into the SCG Invitational on this page. The link will be in the description down below. Furthermore, this time the event was a mix between modern and standard. On day 1 they played a few rounds of standard followed by a few rounds of modern, the same for day 2. On the third day they had the top 8 going, and this time it was all standard and best of 5. Obviously, best of 5 gives a better competitive quality due to more games. However, as always, there were a few of those X-player mulligan to 5 and lost, and in the case of the match in the thumbnail, mulligan down to 4, draw 0 lands the whole game and then lose. In these cases, the new London mulligan would have been nice. I will talk more about the London mulligan in tomorrow's video and give my opinions as well. Rip whatever was left of Legacy. Anyway, let's get started with the SCG Invitational Top 8 list. On place 8 we find Esper Superheroes, or as I would like to call it, mid-range Esper rebranded. To be fair, it has some changes from the mid-range Esper, but it is quite similar. Just a few more planeswalkers, throw in one command of the Dreadhorde, take out a few creatures and call it superheroes. The deck is quite straightforward, however, unlike Esper midrange, it has seen quite a lot of success, with a better late game than the very confusing Esper midrange had. Let's be real here, Esper midrange was quite awful for a competitive deck. I would call it at most a tier 1.5. One thing that did surprise me for this whole weekend was the lack of aggro decks. There were so few of them, together with old school type of control decks. Red Deck Wins is still an amazing competitive tier 1 deck, but people really seem to want to play the new Super Friends and Planeswalker based decks. When it comes to standard control decks, you'd think with cards such as Dovin's Veto, tons of different board clear, Thought Erasure, the Elder Spell, etc., we would at the very least see someone attempt to bring an old school control deck to the table. Yeah, I know, I'm lobbying for the return of control decks. I guess to me these super long drawn out games aren't as interesting as I wanted them to be. Anyway, let's move on to place number 7, and here we find Esper Superheroes. The list is quite similar, lacking Karn and Liliana. Nothing to really talk about here. I guess one of the surprise is the very low number of Dovin's Veto in most decks and sideboards, together with the Elder Spell. I guess we have Teferi Teferi the Time Reveler to thank for the lack of control decks. But unlike Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, he doesn't auto-win you the game if he sticks around for one turn. Cancer fighting cancer. The glass is indeed half full. Oh, and speaking of Liliana, she is proving to be quite underwhelming. In my Planeswalker review, I said I wanted more data before making a final call on her. I still can't really say that she is terrible. She works, but she's not required, but she can be decent. It's very hard to make a proper call on her. You don't need her, but she's not bad, but I still feel like she's more of a win more card. And in the case of the current standard, we have so many Dreadhorde decks that you risk just giving it over to your opponents anyway, considering that most people for some reason don't run Veto in the main board, which is just so weird. Anyway, let's move over to place 6, and here we have Simic Mass Manipulation. We saw this deck taking shape during the last SCG Standard event. Basically, you have a lot of mana elves helping you out with mana, with your endgame goal being either a massive mass manipulation that takes whatever your opponent has and auto-win from there on. Since we don't have any control decks at the moment, there's really no fear of eating board clears, and for some reason people refuse to play Dovin's Veto in the main board. Same goes for most board clears. The few decks that does have the board clear has them in the sideboard, which I honestly can't agree with. I guess my disagreement really comes from the fact that I play MTG Arena and I don't play local events, so I don't have a meta that I need to answer. In MTG Arena, you have decks coming and going all the time, and it's much more common to find creature decks. As we can clearly see in these SCG tournaments, Super Friends are the dominant type, so you have to, a certain degree, agree with the board controls or board wipes in the sideboard just because of how the meta plays out during the tournaments. But for anyone playing MTG Arena, I would certainly recommend to put board control or board clear in the main board. Anyway, if your mass manipulation option is off the table, then your second win condition is the land Nissa. Basically, you create an army of lands and go to town. The deck still has the same weakness as the last event. A good aggro hand can roll over the deck and most Super Friend/Hero decks. Sometimes you don't get the right mana and you just sit there and lose. And sometimes you have to block with all your lands and you end the game with one land left before you lose. Still, in a meta where we are currently lacking control decks, the mass manipulation deck is doing quite well, nothing special in the sideboard. Let's move to place 5, and here we have our only aggro deck in the top 8 list, in the form of Boros Aggro. The only red part of the deck being Experimental Frenzy in the sideboard. To be honest, just play red deck wins instead. It will bring you as far as you like if you put in the time. This Boros Aggro deck is by no means bad, but it costs more in terms of money and or wildcards for the same function as a red deck wins. I guess if you want another aggro deck to play, this would not be a bad choice. Obviously, if you play best of 1, then just put the friends in the main board. Be aware that this deck does not have any spell damage, so you will have to win by attacking. I would also, depending on my rank in MTG Arena, either include or exclude the Honor Guard, depending on how many Dreadhorde with Explore package I am facing. Oh, and put Banefire somewhere, please. That goes for anyone who has red in their decks. On 4th place we have Sultai Dreadhorde. Dreadhorde has finally found its proper home. Not very surprising, really. I was very against Dreadhorde as its own deck, be it 4 or 5 color Dreadhorde, due to its utter dependence on Dreadhorde to work and its weakness against aggro. I recall saying I would rather play Sultai with the Explore package rather than depending on the Dreadhorde every game, and here we are. To be honest, once the London Mulligan becomes the new standard, all the decks we have come to know might be a lot different, so it's kinda hard to recommend a deck right now, but Sultai Dreadhorde, formerly known as Sultai and before that Golgaria, will probably be the fallback default deck in the competitive scene. When it comes to the deck itself, it is not that different from the good old Sultai. A few cards out, Assassin's Trophy into the main board, throw in the Explore package, a confused Jellyfish with a few copies of Commander Dreadhorde, throw a lot of money on unreasonable expensive lands, Legacy, throw in some decent Planeswalkers and call it a day. I would recommend for anyone to craft this as their default deck. 10/10 better love story than Game of Thrones. Let's move on to the 3rd place, and here we have another Esper Superheroes. 3 Chaos Wrath in the sideboard, 2 Night Veil Predator. This deck is so different. Nothing really to add here that I haven't said earlier. I will leave my final remarks about the deck as I close the video down. Let's move on to the 2nd place, and here we have another Sultai Dreadhorde. It is very similar to the first one we had a look at. As I already have said, I would certainly recommend this if you want a solid workhorse. And on the 1st place we have Esper Superheroes, with 3 Chaos Wrath in the sideboard, 1 Elder Spell in the main board, a few numbers shifted here and there, and 1 copy of Liliana. Honestly, either Esper Superheroes or Sultai Dreadhorde could have won the final, and it's very hard to say that one is better than the other. You really can't go wrong with crafting either of the decks at the moment. However, there is one observation to make, and that is when, not if, when the control decks returns. How will superheroes and super friends fare? We know that Sultai will always work no matter what, well until rotation in a few months. But Super Friends and Superheroes has never been forced to deal with a working control deck in our current standard. In conclusion, with the results from this latest SCG standard event, I would leave the following recommendations if you're looking to pick up the latest standard decks. In Tier 1 we have Sultai Dreadhorde, Esper Superheroes, and Red Deck Wins. In Tier 1.5 I would put other aggro decks, mass manipulation decks, token decks, phoenix decks, not with drakes, and yeah, that's it. Anyway, tomorrow I will talk about the London Mulligan, and sometime this week I will release a Red Deck Wins review. I will also make a short video about lands, and if it is, in my opinion, worth to start going after the lands the way certain decks tried during John's long reign of terror in Standard. Anyway, this is Project signing out.